thank you for having me. It is very topical at the moment, guns and gun control. Our thoughts are with the young people in the United States who are trying to change the gun laws over there. It's heartbreaking to see what's happening in the United States, in the schools, and we really do stand with them in their advocacy for change. But probably what I'll concentrate a little bit on today is gun laws here in Australia. Now, who was around 18 when in 1996, or 18 or above? Most, yeah. Yeah, okay. Not you, Stuart. No, you haven't. Okay, so people would be familiar with the Port Arthur massacre, but however, there will be people here tonight who weren't around when the Port Arthur massacre occurred, or weren't teenagers. So maybe I should just start with a little bit of an overview of our gun laws and how they changed and where we are now. So back in 1996, Australia experienced the worst lone gun massacre in modern history. Martin Bryant used self-loading rifles. In a matter of 8 minutes, he managed to shoot 20 people. In a matter of 10 minutes, he managed to kill 35 people and injure 19 others in Tasmania at the Broad Arrow Cafe at historical site down at Port Arthur. Now 35 people, when you compare it to the stats in the United States, the massacres that are happening at the moment, it's smaller, but at that particular time, back in 1996, it was, as I said, the largest lone man massacre for a very long time. And Australia did punch above its weight in terms of gun ownership and gun massacres. Now, John Howard got into Parliament, and it was just 57 days after he had been elected that this massacre occurred. It's also important to remember that Port Arthur massacre happened in April, and just before that massacre, another massacre happened in Scotland. Does anyone know what that massacre was? That's right, yeah. Yeah, so the Dunblane massacre occurred, and primary school children were shot dead, again by a lone gunman using a semi-automatic weapon. So that happened in March, and then the Port Arthur massacre happened in April. It shocked Australia to the core, is probably a way to explain it. And it's not the first massacre that Australia experienced, and obviously I don't touch upon it here, but we had a frontier history. There were a lot of Aboriginal massacres, but even before the Port Arthur massacre, there were 18 massacres in Australia before the Port Arthur massacre. So even though America has had a lot of massacres, we had a lot of massacres too, and did pretty much nothing about it for a very long period of time. But when John Howard got into Parliament and this very horrific massacre happened, he instigated quite significant change. The change to gun laws that we actually haven't seen since, or even before that time. Some of the major changes to our gun laws were a ban on self-loading semi-automatic long arms, a national registration and licensing system, and one major issue was that gun ownership became a privilege rather than a right. Now, before these gun laws came into place, in Tasmania, how long do you think you could own a gun licence for? That's right, forever. Once you got your gun licence, you could have it for life. And you could own as many guns as you want to. There were very minimal criminal background checks. There were some, but not very significant checks. And you can get self-loading, military-style, high-powered firearms. In fact, you probably could get a rocket launcher in Tasmania before the Port Arthur massacre and shoot it down the street, and it would have been legal. Our laws were pretty bleak before they were changed. And what I guess the significance of the change was, or what we've seen now, is that we have had no gun massacres since 1996. Research does show that our gun laws have worked to prevent gun deaths. Now, massacres are actually quite rare when you look at gun deaths overall. Does anyone know what the main gun death is? That's right, yeah. So in Australia and also in America, suicide is a big element of gun deaths. And we've seen quite a significant reduction in gun deaths using firearms. The significance of that being is that when a person uses a firearm for suicide, it's pretty much the end. If they used another means, such as medication or gassing or something like that, there's a chance that someone may find them and they may recover. But with gun suicides, it's pretty much fatal. Now, the key to the Port Arthur Agreement that John Howard introduced was that it was quite swift. As I said, he'd only been in Parliament 57 days. He'd managed to get bipartisan support, even from his own party, which was a Liberal National Coalition. Tim Fischer played quite a significant role in getting the National Party on board. And it was a very significant time to have such bipartisan support. However, saying that, there was a public opinion poll taken at the time that showed that 96% of Australians who were polled wanted change and wanted strong gun laws. So a key to, I guess, or a message is that public opinion can change legislation and it can sway politicians to think about what they're doing and to do something different. After John Howard introduced, or what was called the National Firearms Agreement, the agreement is not legislation, it's an agreement. He then sought for the states and territories to commit to introducing legislation within their own state and territory. Now, this agreement was set in May, and then every state and territory changed their gun laws by the end of July. So it's a fairly quick time frame in terms of legislative movement. There was resistance, particularly in New South Wales. The Bob Carr government at the time was dragging its heels and was not wanting to comply with the National Firearms Agreement. So it did take a fair bit of persuading, but again, public opinion really did drive the matter on the day. The problem, though, that we have now is that each state and territory has its own gun laws, and those gun laws are to comply with the National Firearms Agreement. However, what we're finding now is that state gun laws are a political hot potato. Deals are being done with gun lobbies and politicians, particularly in the upper houses of Victoria, New South Wales and Western Australia. You scratch my back and I'll scratch yours, and they've been able to instigate quite significant amendments to our gun laws in Australia. Some of the significant changes to the laws in Australia at the moment is that they have removed, each state and territory pretty much has removed background checks for persons who want second or subsequent hunting rifles. What that means is that if I have a firearms licence, I've already purchased a hunting rifle, I then, for example, a year later, I want to go get 10 other hunting rifles or 5 other hunting rifles. I don't have to go through any further criminal background checks. The problem with that being is that people's circumstances change over time, and this will not be picked up on because of these background checks not being completed. Another really significant problem in our gun laws at the moment is the ability to accumulate quite a large number of firearms per licence holder. So we know that one gun licence holder in New South Wales has over 300 firearms to themselves. They're not a collector, they're not a dealer, they're just an individual gun licence holder. And this is because our laws are being watered away.
How many?
300, over 300.
312.
312. So overall, there's 3.2 million firearms now in Australia, which is more than what there was before the Port Arthur massacre. Although our population has grown and per capita there's less firearms per capita, there's more firearms per licence holder. What's also an issue is that the gun lobby is on the rise here in Australia. I don't know if anyone's seen The Guardian today, but the Honourable Peter Dutton has met with a gun lobby advocate group known as the Shooting Foundation of Australia, and has agreed to set up another firearms, what I call support group, which is where it's the federal government gets a group of gun lobby representatives into a room and gets their views on our gun laws and how we can change them. We're seeing this happen across the country, that politicians are doing lots of deals with the gun lobby and that our laws are being significantly watered down. Although the three pillars still exist, we still have a national licensing and national registration system, and the fact that gun ownership is still a privilege rather than a right. The scaffolding holding up those pillars is collapsing, and we really do need to try and change the conversation about our gun laws here in Australia. If anything I want you to take away with you tonight is that our gun laws are in trouble. They need your help, that they are being watered down at quite a significant rate, and unfortunately I think it will be only a matter of time before some tragedy happens again here in Australia. So I ask for your support to join up to Gun Control Australia and to follow the news about what's happening with our gun laws here in Australia. Thank you.